yours.
Thank you so much, Will. That was a lovely introduction. Let me go ahead and share my slides and then we'll get going. And I already had a look at the attendees and I can see quite a few familiar names. So, yeah, don't be backwards about coming forwards. Make sure you put your questions in there and make sure that we have a really good conversation. So I'm going to go ahead and Will, if you would launch the first poll for our audience, that would be great. And the first poll is, what is the biggest challenge preventing you from scaling AI agents? Is it reliability, hallucinations, integration with existing systems, governance and control, lack of internal expertise, cost unclear ROI, process readiness? Goodness, there's a lot of problems. Or if there's something else that you are facing, put it into the attendee chat. We want to make sure that we're answering any of the problems that you guys are facing. So while I have that up, I'm going to introduce our speakers for today. So first up, we have Uli Erxleben. He's a founder and CEO for Hypertest. There he is waving at you. Hypertest is an agentic AI provider based in Berlin and New York that provides both out-of-the-box and custom AI agents designed specifically for GBS. Before founding Hypatus, Uli worked at McKinsey and Company in Berlin and Palo Alto and served as MD of Rocket Internet and ProSiebenSat SE. And since 2014, he's been an entrepreneur focused on process automation, founding Hypatus in 2018. And Hypatus has since become a key player in that agentic AI market, featuring in both the Gartner Quadrant and the Everest Peak Matrix. And he's joined today by Hans Schutt. Hans, give us a wave. He is the manager for corporate service transformation at KPMG Netherlands. He's an experienced consultant who specializes in the implementation of AI in financial and business processes, intelligent automation, and operational excellence. Hans operates in Amsterdam and focuses on transforming business services. So, two very well qualified speakers joining us today for this discussion. So I am going to end our poll and I'm going to share with you guys. And it seems like people are facing a variety of problems. 24% say governance and control, which comes up as at the top. And luckily, that is something we're going to cover later in the session. So not to worry. Followed by process readiness. And then I think we've got tied maybe, oh no, lack of internal expertise. Yeah, we hear that a lot. And then integration and reliability. So a lot of different problems facing you guys looking to scale.
That's a great outcome, by the way. I think that is what it is indeed.
Yeah, it's almost like we planned it with our presentation. So perfect. Right. So this is our agenda for today. We're going to cover a little bit on the shift from AI experiments to enterprise scale, which is kind of capturing the essence of 2026. We're going to look at why so many AI projects fail and give you a little bit of a overview of the red flags that you might need to watch for. We're going to look at AI, agentic AI versus agent washing, because one of the key things that you need to scale is proper agentic AI to get that end-to-end process flow. We're going to delve into three core success factors to agentic AI scaling. We're then going to do kind of a little quick tech demo, which will be able to show you it in practice as opposed to us just talking about it. And then we're going to finish up with our top tips for successfully scaling agentic AI. We've got some time at the end for questions, but if you do have questions, pop them into the attendee chat and we will endeavor to answer as many as possible.
And Sally, I've already seen a couple of questions that I find incredibly relevant, right? So let's really make sure that we get at least 10 minutes at the end to address those.
Absolutely, yeah. And Uli said he is up for difficult questions, guys, so you can challenge him. Um, Yeah, so let me get started on this. Oh, one more thing I forgot to say. The Resources Centre, I know a lot of you will ask me. There is a copy of the slides in there for you. There's also a link to our podcast, GBS Rewired, a link to our handbook on building an agentic GBS, and I think our checklist for security. So loads of really good resources in that resource centre at the bottom. So first up, as I said, 2025, for all intents and purposes, was the year of pilots for agentic AI. There was a lot of experimentation, a lot of proofs of concept, and a lot of agentic AI that was being trialed in these happy processes, happy paths, sandboxed environments, where not too much can go wrong. But as we all know, in order to properly realize the ROI, we need to deploy AI throughout the GBS, and that means scaling. So 2026, we see a lot of our customers, a lot of organizations scaling agentic AI, and that means applying it to messy real world processes where things can go wrong, and it's dealing with the reality of day-to-day business. Gartner says that 40% of agentic AI projects are expected to fail by 2027, and I've heard much bigger percentages than that. But often the problem isn't the technology, it's actually the operating model. So the processes, the skills, the data readiness within the GBS. So that's what we're going to kind of try and get to today and ensure you guys are on the right path for using agentic AI properly. Okay. So, Hans, I'm going to come to you first. And I would love you to talk our audience through a little bit about why AI projects fail. What are the kind of red flags and problems that you see that people need to watch out for?
Yeah, thank you. And I think, yeah, very interesting point indeed. Yeah, to me, an interesting one already, like right as an implementation consultant, proof of concepts are amazing. They are fun. You can show a lot of value there. However, the reality moving from POC to actual production, yeah, product, that's a big difference. So I think yeah, a false confidence getting from these proof of concepts towards like a full scale implementation, that is something where you should really be aware of yeah, the reality of moving towards this agentic setup, because a setup will behave much different compared to a data set of 100 examples compared to one with 1,000 or 10,000 different ones which you're going to face in a production environment. So that's already one that where we know and we've seen, okay, these are actually challenges you should take very seriously. And I think having clear success criteria on this process here is key. And then maybe not even to mention the process itself. So the process around really knowing the process and explaining it to an agent, because you need to explain it to your prompts, to your agents, similar to how you would convey it to a colleague, is difficult. And you will see within different teams that parts of the process are hidden in the minds of 10 different colleagues, but you don't know what you don't know. And then when you're live, they realize, or you realize, well, we missed a part. And that can be quite tricky then to solve to a good level.
Yeah, Hans, maybe on this point, right? Because if you set something up in a POC, right, you define your common use cases, the ones that are top of mind, and then you make sure that this works fine. The reality is different because you get so much mess, stuff that doesn't make sense, things that do not belong into that process, but that you still would receive from your business partner. And also, this needs to be dealt with, right? And there is a lot of those exceptions and special cases that require a perspective on what to do with them, right? And this needs to be defined, and that is usually not defined. It's just how people do it. And that needs to come into a codified way so that you can give feedback and teach the agents on how to decide in those situations in compliance with how it should be done, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
And maybe let me maybe also make another point on this no clear AI strategy, right? Because this is something that I do observe a lot. So what I see in reality is that there is this perception that we should now get going and use Gen AI and AI agents in our business support. So let's go ask the business where they see potentials and then do some obscure little niche complicated use case. No, no, guys, this is not how strategy works. Strategy means that, and this is a C-level task, to clearly define a vision of the future when it comes to the use of agentic AI. And that means, right, could be in 5 years from now, 90% of our business transactions in GBS, purchase to pay, order to cash, record to record, is going to be completely autonomously handled by AI agents. That is the vision of the future. And now you work backwards and plan for what that means and in what sequence you're going to address that problem, right? So this is how you need to think about this. And that needs to come from C-level as a clear guidance and direction for the organization. It's not a grassroots bottom-up type of initiative. And right, I mean, that is done often not quite right from my point of view.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And someone definitely agrees with you in the chat. Thank you. One of the other things that I wanted to kind of touch on is really about how we spot if something is truly agentic. And this is something I really push for having in the presentation because when I go to conferences and when I speak to people, there are just so many misconceptions about what agentic AI is and so many different providers. And Gartner says that one of the reasons that they put this kind of 40% of agentic AI projects failing by 2027 is because a lot of the vendors are engaging in agentic washing. And that is why kind of the promise of agentic won't be realized because it can't truly enable these end-to-end processes. So I wanted to kind of challenge Uli and Hans really around how do you spot if something is truly agentic? Maybe Uli, we can go to you first this time.
Yeah, so I mean, you can read those points, they're all true. But I think the essence of that question is a bit different. So what you need to come to understand is that a agent system, right, a real agentic automation project is not putting some Gen AI large language model technology into your enterprise workflow application that helps you to better capture data from your invoices. Right? This is using large language models in something that you're using today to become more productive. It's helping. No, an agentic automation project means that you hand over the handling of a transaction from beginning to end to a group of AI agents that work together to solve the problem. And then they are going to interact with you, with the owners, with the business approvers, and whoever needs to provide some feedback and input or approval. So you interact with them, but they do the job. They are like coworkers that work with you. It's not just bringing some new feature into an existing workflow. And that also means that those systems are capable of operating all those softwares, right? I mean, there's a bigger question whether you need all those heavy weight enterprise workflow solutions that are built around your ERP system or your CRM system. That's a completely different question. Let's assume you want to keep them for whatever reason. Then the agents need to work with those systems in the same way that a human operator would do. And it's many, many different systems, right? It's not just your one ERP, it's all your ERPs, right? It's all your workflow solutions for all the stuff that you get. So this ability to use independently application and tools to solve problems, this is a very important element of having an agent that is capable of doing something. And right then, when you look at those points here, one thing that I find always a bit confusing, when you speak about agents, you often hear as a description of what an agent is just give the agents an objective, right? So your job is to do our bookkeeping. Here's the keys to our SAP system. Go ahead, do it. No, this is not what you want. You will be surprised how good that would actually be done by an agent system, but that's not what you want. You want to have a system that does that job exactly how you need it to be done, according to your processes, in a way that is compliant and consistent. So you need to first define and describe on how that should be done. That doesn't mean that you need to have if-then relationships to everything that could happen. That is not what that means. But you need to describe, and we will see it in the demo, how that actually looks like. You need to describe how things should be done so that they are compliant, explainable, and controllable by you. And such an agent system needs to be able to follow those instructions precisely, explain every decision, and receive feedback for business events where there is no work instruction yet, so that they can learn, quote unquote, learn, it's context learning, or a little bit different, so that they can get better. by providing feedback. And this idea of providing feedback to your new super skillful coworker is also something that makes an agentic system actually work, right? And then you have this entire complex of explainability. So you will always, and I've seen the question regarding hallucination and all those type of things, right? So hallucination in an enterprise agent system must not happen because you need to get the agents to explain every decision based on their instructions and based on your data. Their superpower is that they are capable of understanding work instructions. They are capable of understanding an invoice or a sales order to a level where they can say, okay, so I got a, what have you, right? Some iPhone component that I have here. And of course, this could be office materials, but I know because I have the instruction that I should watch out for stuff that could be gifts to employees. And that is stuff that the HR folks and tech should be having a look at, right? So this ability to understand human language, context, and data, that makes those systems powerful. But without clear instructions on what to do in certain situations, they're not going to be able to deliver quality and they're not going to be able to explain to you why they made a decision, right? And this being able to explain, I'm going to show also in the demo later on, is also an extremely important part of those systems.
I think this is also precisely what we're now seeing in our setups, right? So these agentic flows, they enable us, for example, to start entering this whole new business of automatic processing of non-PO invoices, which, for example, requires this general ledger determination, cost center determination, requester or site code determination. Like these are all quite deterministic elements that you usually could not process in a normal old-fashioned way of automating things because there is reasoning required. And indeed, like precisely how you're mentioning it here, when we are determining a general ledger, we are seeing the agent with the reasoning behind it saying, I'm following this and this rule. I am seeing that in our accounts, it says I should take this. We have discussed, or you have instructed me, if I see a certain account like this, I should follow this and this step. And for example, maybe split or aggregate the line item. But we really need this explanation from a developer point of view as well to understand, is it now actually following our instructions or not? So
Yeah.
we would otherwise indeed be writing blind here in our implementations. So I think that's one. I think, yeah, the other point, right, on the different elements that you should use like your ground truth, your data, your to make it truly agentic. Without a ground truth data set where we would know examples that we could use as a reference, the performance would be much lower. It's like you actually need them to be in this high automatic processing setup. I think that
Yeah, and you
should
need
not
to
be
teach them
underestimated.
by example, right? You need to teach them like a new coworker. So let me show you an example. This is how this is done, right? And then the strength of those systems is that they then know how to do it. They can learn from those examples, but those examples need to be there and they need to be done correctly, right? That's also something. Just going for this is how we have done it in the past. So just look into all our bookkeeping of the last 2 years and figure it out yourself. It's an approach that you can take, but you need to also make sure that you have done it correctly, right? That's one of the very big misconceptions, right? Your history is not perfect, right? And you want to instruct the agents in a quite perfect way. Also something that leads to a lot of confusion often.
Yeah. I'm conscious of time, so let me move us on to the next slide. That is kind of the meat of what we're going to talk about, which is the three core success factors to agentic AI scaling. And Will, if you wouldn't mind just sharing the next poll, that would be great. It's a topic that I think is super important and interesting, and we'd love to know for you who owns agentic in your organization. We have our own thoughts and opinions, which we'll share, but is it the GBS, IT, no clear owner, or if it again is something else, pop it in the chat. We'd love to see what you guys are deciding on. We will cover kind of governance in just a minute as well. I'm going to leave that up while I go on to the next slide for you. So I wanted to hand over to you, Hans, and talk a little bit about process readiness, because as we know, this is a core factor of being ready to implement, but also being ready to scale. I'd love to ask you a little bit about process readiness in the context of scaling AI. How do we get it ready?
Yeah, so I think very good question. Also very important, probably the most important topic when starting with an AI project, AI implementation. So as said before, right? So we see that often the knowledge is hidden in the heads of the different colleagues, even after when we usually start with these workshops, 3 hour sessions, one, two, three times, to really get a good overview of what is here the truth of this process, and it takes time. So and still we find that when we're live and the customer in this case is using the setup, the team is coming with new examples like, oh, actually, apologies, we forgot. This is something we also do, and we need to add it to the script, which can be challenging because you don't want to have all these exceptions in your setup, which are contradicting your initial sort of instruction. And this,
Let me just quickly react to the results of the poll.
Sure.
yeah,
Guys,
yeah,
no, you are wrong. It is not the IT and platform team. Absolutely incorrect thinking. Let me explain later on. Just as a quick reaction to this. This is not right.
It's a very bold reaction, Uli,
all
for
right.
our
Well,
audience.
I'm
I would
happy to
expect
share
nothing
some. I'm
less.
happy to share some insights there too, because I think there are some nice references here that we can make indeed. So no, but to follow up on my points, right? So understanding the process, it sounds like such an open door, but it's difficult to emphasize how much you really need to know because it's not in your typical working instruction, and they are often 10 years old. So that is really part one. So having long and yeah, often conversations with the client. Yeah, I think the other part which will help and is actually key to know, am I building something that works, is creating this test set. As I said, a POC with only 100 examples is not going to cover the real life situation. So creating a test set, a real ground truth, basically, for any of your projects will help firstly to understand, am I building something that hits the mark, the KPIs that we discussed, that is basically automating what we intended to automate. But secondly, this test set or this ground truth set, it's a common practice, is also providing you with similarity examples, which will then also start improving the AI performance. So yeah, that's a couple of ideas from a process perspective. And yeah, moving to
Yeah,
Ute.
Hans, yeah, let me just double click on it. I mean, there's just one key message here. It's very simple. You need to have good processes that you document well, that cover how things should be done in your organization. And you may think you have it. I can already tell you, you do not have it. Right? A global enterprise, active in 80 countries. And every country does things a little bit differently because they just do it a bit differently. Not good. And then, of course, there's reasons why they do it differently, right? Because there's different regulation, tax works differently, what have you. Then you should be doing it differently. And that needs to be documented. It cannot just be in people's heads, right? You need to teach this to the AI. They need to know, and they need to know not how it's done today, but how it should be done. So the core thing is the GPO, friends, right? A global process owner. You know all that concept, right? In every GPS workshop, you will hear about GPOs. From my point of view, the actual role of the GPO happens in agentifying your processes, because this actually does require actual end-to-end process ownership. Someone needs to own those work instructions, how the process should be run. Someone with authority that can also have a tough discussion with a business unit that thinks it should be done differently. So that is how success looks like if you have someone that owns the process and work instructions. It's super important. And guys, I've been saying a GPO needs to own the work instructions. We say process readiness is the most important thing to make those projects successful. So guess what? The ownership of an agentic system sits with the GBS organization and the GPO, certainly not with the IT. Guys, certainly not with the IT.
I think I'm also seeing a question where in the chat around why would you not include all the exceptions or other paths, right? So this is what we are seeing in our setup. So the more exceptions you're gonna add to your prompt, so you have this amazing happy flow path in your prompt, and you're gonna start an exception one. Except for this case, I'm gonna add this. Only for this supplier, you need to treat it differently. Do it like this. These exceptions are gonna be contradictions in your prompt, in your instructions to the agent. And the more contradictions you build in this setup, what we are seeing is entering to bad behavior, hallucinations, but also just stop following the logic basically that we intended the agent to follow. So yeah, that's why we try to minimize all these exception layers in our agents. And if you do, try to do it in different agents, but then again, it's not gonna optimize your performance.
Yeah, and guys, think about it, right? I mean, so you have a process description developed 10 years ago and you handed this over to your shared service colleagues, do it like this. And stuff gets done, right? People are not saying it's not in the work instructions because they find their own workarounds, right? They just get it somehow done. You cannot control how they do it, they just get it done. It's also completely intransparent to you. If you hand a work instruction to an agent and say, this is how you need to do it, it's going to be done exactly how you instruct. Right? You do not want them to become creative and find a workaround because that is not controllable anymore. So now you need to start thinking about exceptions and cannot just rely on some intransparent way of how problems are solved behind the scenes that you will never see. Those days are over. And this is also a frustration of a GPO. You can define as many work instructions as you want. People are not going to be using them the way that you want them to use. In the new age, they are going to be used exactly as you give them to the AI. AI is incredibly consistent in doing so, but that raises a lot of additional thoughts that you need to put into those process descriptions.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So the next piece we were gonna focus on is the agent coordination and architecture. Naturally, with scaling, oh, that's popped up. Naturally, with scaling, you're gonna have to work with lots of different agents working on different parts of the process. Uli, I mean, would you be able to take us through how this is set up?
Yeah, let's stick this slide before we go into the next one, please.
Mhm.
So definitely my understanding of an AI agent system for one of those big processes in your GBS organization, it's not a single agent, guys. It's a multi-agent system. It's experts that work together to solve complicated problems. Always multi-agent, multi-step processes require this, right? You need to orchestrate, right? You need to tell them how they should be working. I mean, they're quite powerful to figure stuff out on their own, but that is not what you want. You need to give guidance, right? You need to orchestrate them. You need to tell them how they should be doing it so that you do it in a compliant and consistent way. It's important. All the integrations, right? It's a fantasy to say that everything is happening in our ERP system. No, guys, come on, right? I mean, you have many different ERP systems probably in your group. You have many different workflow systems. You have many different emails. You have e-invoicing portals. You have vendor portals. You have all that stuff, right? You have a master data process. You have your service now for some stuff that is happening. And all those systems play a role in handling the stuff that comes in from your business partners end to end. And you need to have all those systems connected and integrated with your agents so that they can use them. Right? And maybe on the architecture, because I saw that question earlier on. We don't have a slide for this, but it might be an interesting talking point here. So there's a certain way on how agents work, and you need to have a technology platform that enables you to work in that way, how they work. Let me briefly explain on that slide here how those systems work. So what you see here is an example, relatively generic, of a agent system, multi-agent setup, where you have a workflow from a business transaction that comes in to getting information out, validating it, getting master data done, doing, I don't know, accounting, PO matching, product catalog, reconciliation tasks, cash app, what have you, right? Whatever the assessment coding is, compliance, tax, right? And then interaction with your business colleagues that need to do approvals, what have you, right? So it's multi-step. And every actor every specialist agent in that process, the guy that is responsible for information extraction, the guy that is responsible for the master data, the one that is responsible for coding, the one that is responsible for tax, those agents have their specialist work instructions. This is how tax is done. Quite detailed topic. You need to write those work instructions. This is how we do tax. And then you need to provide the knowledge to the agent to make decisions. So knowledge means this is the local tax law, and this is the services and products that are reduced in VAT or that are exempt from VAT. That is stuff that is ever changing, and it's something that's codified in the law. So that information, that knowledge needs to be provided, and you want the agents to then explain, always referring to that information. It's your master data. There's also knowledge that the AI needs to have. And you better make sure that your master data is correct and makes sense. Otherwise, they're going to fail in providing a good job. So the architecture of an agentic platform always the same. Prompt management is the work instructions, prompting, prompt engineering, right? And then you need to give the knowledge to make right decisions. That is called context engineering. So prompt engineering, context engineering, this is how that works. And now the platform needs to cater to being able to provide that information and to organize and manage this. But the most important thing is you need to own the quality of that context and the quality of the work instructions. Yeah, back to that point. And this is why you need to own this, right? You need to make sure that your master data is correct, not the IT guys. You need to make sure that the work instructions for tax finding is actually adequate, not the IT guys. Right? The ownership sits with the people that actually know how to do stuff and can set those standards. So, and your architectural decision is, right, whatever prompt management, whatever knowledge base you're using, whatever integration technology you're using, in the end, it doesn't matter, right? I mean, there's a bit out there. What matters is that you have those work instructions in highest quality and that you have the methods to get the context right. And this is where you can also choose, right? And this is now my sales pitch to you guys, to take a standard solution that already brings this, and it's easy to adjust rather than developing this all on your own. Yeah, so this is important to keep that in mind, right? All your procedures, all your guidelines, all your certifications need to go into that knowledge base, and you are responsible for curating that knowledge because that knowledge is used by the AI to explain its decisions also to the auditor. This is where explainability comes from. It needs to be controlled.
100%. And let me just move to our third point in terms of success, because I think it's one of the most important for our audience based on the poll that we did at the beginning, and that's governance at scale. I know you've touched on it a little bit, Uli, already in terms of where you feel ownership should sit. Maybe we could start with you, Uli, and then move to Hans within this slide. So would you want to kind of touch on a bit of the auditability, Uli?
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, point one, you heard me already. It is not owned by the IT, it's owned by the business, by the GBS. It's also not owned by the vendors, right? There are some clients that think that we are responsible for their work instructions, certainly not. Right. So I think that point has been brought home. Auditability, right?
I think if I just can add on to the ownership. There's a discussion here. I think I'm not sure if any of the attendees are also familiar with like the typical old school RPA setups here, but what we are seeing is there's going to be a similar approach, right? Also, when we were building these RPA scripts, deploying them in back office of different clients, usually the conversation was around, okay, who's going to own the output of this RPA script of this robot, and time again you will have the discussion. No, actually, a dear colleague of this team, you're basically the one still responsible for managing the output, and that is similar here. And also from managing perspective, I see quite some similarities there on how you can apply this.
Yeah, that's a great comparison. And also when it comes to, I know you're going to cover a little bit of the auditability, Uli, in your solution demo. Is
Yeah,
it?
I'm focusing on this, right? Because
Yeah.
it's a core topic. Guys, so what we're doing here in GBS, right? This is stuff that has quite a bit of compliance implication. And it's stuff that is audited, right? Because it leads to your financial statements and to tax and what have you. So the core here is every decision taken by an agent team needs to be explainable. So you need to understand exactly where that answer comes from. Hallucinations is the black box thing. You ask ChatGPT a question and you get an answer back. You have no idea where that answer comes from. In an agent system, in an enterprise setup, you ask a question, you get an answer, and you get a detailed explanation referring to the work instructions and referring to the context, to your data, why that is done like this. And then you can read it. And if you see, yeah, no, actually, I understand why you made a mistake here because the work instruction doesn't correctly reflect what should be done. I need to add to it. Yeah, so this is the process that needs to be done. Right? Very important. And I mean, if you go to risk management compliance here, right? Of course, you have this element of data security. And I just want to bring one point home. So in those compliance heavy processes, right? You will hear from your IT department often we can just build it on our own. We have Copilot Studio or some platform and we're just going to go ahead and do it. And I mean, you have data protection requirements. They're super, super heavy because those systems are connected to lots of your data. They're very heavy lifting, right? They're using large language models that are hosted somewhere. So there's lots of things that you just need to have in place and something that you need to reassess all the time. It's very, very heavy lifting to get such a system certified, right? And maintain it in a certified way. Very heavy lifting. Don't do this on your own. You should not. Right? And then there is this entire realm of business compliance. This is how we need to do our accounting. This is how we need to do our tax. And someone owns this, your tax department, right? And there needs to be clear compliance procedures on how to determine tax that needs to be owned by you, and it needs to be traceable and auditable because you always can accept a human error. Right, so a colleague might have gotten a training 5 years ago on how to do this specific withholding tax case here in Indonesia, and then they forgot and made a mistake. Mistakes do happen, right? And they have been trained, so no one's fault. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not perfect, but it's the realities. With such a system, it's different, right? Because it does what it's instructed to do. And if it does it incorrectly, then why did it do this? Because your instructions were wrong, and that needs to be fixed, right? And needs to be managed in a very different way because it's not as forgiving with regard to mistakes. Like just a mishap of a human operator. Very important concept. So that needs to be managed with all the stakeholders in the company, with tax, with legal, with ops. Really important. And then, of course, right, those agent systems are very powerful, right? If you hand the keys to your SAP system to an agent, right, you better make sure that the agent is not going to do any crazy stuff with this, right? So there's also this element of the superpowers that agents have to not be used for stuff that they should not be used for.
And I think this was also for us during the implementations that we did because we moved from the typical more deterministic implementation projects towards these agentic AI projects, right? So it was also a big shift for us in implementing this, but also how to manage this. And I think how you should see it is these agents are basically more like a product than a typical software solution. So it will require your typical over continuous management here to ensure basically the process running as intended. And for us, that was also quite a shift in the way of thinking when deploying these AI agents.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a minute and let Uli share his because I know you're going to kind of show us how it works in practice. I do want to keep us moving because I know that we want to
Yeah,
have time for.
we need to hurry up a little bit. So I'm going to just focus it on two main takeaways that I have for you guys
Perfect.
on compliance and ownership of this, right? That you understand it a bit better. Okay, just real quick, jumping into the agent builder part of sort of our platform thing. So what you see here is an invoice. I mean, some of you might have seen me present. I'm often using this example here because I like it so much. It's German speaking, but it's an invoice. We're talking about the invoice to pay automation process here. So you have an image, you have outputs that are generated by the agents. What I want to show to you. So talking about real agentic, right? Let me click on that tab. So that tab is all the different agents, right? Someone that does document routing, information extraction, master data enrichments, coding, PO matching, right? All that stuff, exception handling. We talked about this, right? So they're specialists for those different tasks. They use large language models. And the way they work is that they process their work instructions. We will look into work instructions a little bit here. That's your role and responsibility. That's the inputs you should be using. And this is how we want to have the job done. This is the data formats we need, right? It's work instructions. You write them. Information is like the most simple problem, right? I mean, this is really simple. So, and then the agent says, okay, I got the instructions and here's my explanations. Right, so I say this is an invoice because it says Rechnung, and Rechnung is the German word for invoice, right? It explains every decision, so you can just look into the explanations, understand how they explain. They're going to do this based on their work instructions and what's on the document. And if you spot a mistake, you can see, okay, the work instructions are incorrect. I need to make a change. So this is now done by every agent, and those work results are handed over to the next agent. Next agent picks it up and continues working on the problem, right? So this is how you make it generally transparent, because you can look always into the work instruction and into the explanations of the agents, right? It's one of the core concepts here. And it's many different agents that hand over work results and do their job. So reasoning, right? Very simple reasoning here is I reason why I say that this is MM for the non-SAP users. It's a PO-based invoice, and it's because there's a PO number, simple, but there's also a better reason, and this is I was querying all open POs for this vendor, and there is POs that actually match what's invoiced here. So system doesn't need a PO number, right? It has all that information, but it needs to explain why it made a decision. So now let's talk compliance real quick, because now it's getting interesting. So top compliance topic is tax costs, right? So there's a tax agent team, and there is a actor in that tax agent team that does a transaction analysis. So what that guy does is there is a lot of attributes of a invoice transaction, right? Taxability, goods or services. What is the flow of goods here from the Netherlands to Germany? It fits our webinar perfectly, actually. Right? So this is decisions that need to be made that lead to a tax treatment. And those decisions need to be explained, right? Because it's clear, right? It tells where the warehouse was and from where it was delivered. So this is why I know the goods movements. So this is protocoled. And it's protocoled for a reason, because this you put into your archive, because the auditor is going to look at this, because this explains why you made a certain taxation decision, right? And this is the type of explainability that you need to have with those systems, and it needs to be structured really well. Decisions made, decisions explained, right? And this needs to be always accessible, no black boxes, like legal requirements, right? For the VAT compliance stuff in Europe, right? Big deal. Lots of things that need to be passed. That all needs to be documented and explained so that you can actually understand why things have done in a certain way. So this is how you need to ensure compliance. It's complicated to build a system that is so explainable, right? This is something you need to do. But what I wanted to show you, and this is back to the ownership problem. So, I mean, by the way, this is now, we're now getting into the agent configuration here. It's a bit technical, don't worry about it. But what you see here is all the agents, right? So this is all the agents that work in invoice processing, and the way that those agents work. And that's not important, right? They work off of work instructions. We mentioned that many times. The work instructions is the description of how stuff should be done. Of course, they have a large language model here, and there's versioning and all that stuff. That's prompt management. But what it essentially is, there's a role and a responsibility of an agent and a team. You need to assign this, right? You are the guy that does the GL coding. And then there's inputs you should please be using, right? What's in the document, historical examples, accounting guidelines, right? This is what you need to use. That's your input. It's just described there. That's your inputs. And then there is guidance. This is how you need to do it. This is how we want you to do split postings, how we want you to aggregate. And this is the steps we want you to follow. It's just described here in words, right? It's not programmed. It's not if then. It's not rule based, but it's very clear instructions how you want to have stuff carried out. And in order to have those instructions, you need to come clean how it should be done, right? You need to codify your process. You need to set standards. And the standard setting, owning those prompts, this is the ownership of the agentic platform. This is it. And this is a process owner job, right? And not an IT job, because just read it. You need to know how to do it, not an IT job. Okay, that is the key insight I wanted to do. So I hand over to you, Sally.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. It's always really good to see it in action, I think. And I know there's so much more we could go over. Let me just run the third poll. If you could just pop that up on the screen, while I go ahead and share my slides again. Yeah, so we get asked all the time about use cases, about how to employ and deploy agentic AI. So, if you guys are interested and you want to kind of have a session that will help you brainstorm your agentic AI use cases with Hypetus and KPMG here, let us know if that would be useful. Just needs 45 minutes of your time, and we can go ahead and set that up. Okay, where's my slides again? Perfect. Okay, we'll just keep that open for us.
And say just the
Yeah.
time in mind, right?
Mhm.
We would really like to look at a couple of those questions
Yes,
that we have,
absolutely.
right? I think we have just this overview slide with the must do or red flag type of cases. I think that we can also share. So
Yeah,
I
of
would
course.
like to take the questions now that we have some time to discuss.
Yeah, great idea. I also want to dive into the questions because that's what the live webinar is all about. And I love, Summit's comment here is one of our POCs for using AI is to improve process documentation maturity. So he's
Mhm.
already right on the money there. That is so, so important. And I think it becomes just more important as more people retire. GBS industry, we know that people tend to leave after 3 to 4 years. So it's such a great way of having that knowledge and process documentation.
Essentially,
And
I've seen another question pop up that
yeah,
was with regard to process mining and can that not be used? It
mm,
it pays a little bit into I have an AI write my process documentation. I mean, you also have an AI write prompts for your AI, right? I mean, that is how you do, but you still need to have the bullets straight on how it should be done. That's your responsibility. So here is the complication with using your process mining provider to help you document your process. It's not about what your process is today. I already tell you, right? I mean, you go to Salonis, you get that spaghetti plate, and it looks crazily not great. That is not what the AI agent should be doing. The AI agent should be doing it how it should be done, not how it is done. Guys, just to be clear, there's a very big difference, right? So you can take your process analysis, mining results, but then have someone, global process owner, for example, sit down and define how it should be done, right? Document this, and that is what goes into your work instructions. And of course, you can have the work instruction be written or prompted by an AI. Yeah, this is also how we do it, but you need to give that guidance, right? This is how we want to do it. You can consult an AI, how should I do it? You can converse with an AI to improve your thinking and perspective, but in the end, you are going to be the one that owns the decision how it's actually done, and that needs to go into work instruction.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
However,
Def-
I do think looking at process mining there, it really helps us with the conversation with the team just to ask how explain to us the process, because what you will often see is that it doesn't add up compared to what you have mined. And when you go into those different, sometimes a bit awkward conversations, but you say it's going via flow A, but actually we are seeing that you're doing B. This we need that input for our process basically. So it can help us quite a lot sometimes. If some customers have it already, then it's really nice to have to get this idea of okay, what questions should I ask this team basically in this process, and that's quite nice to have.
yeah. Yeah, 100%. Let me just stop sharing my screen for now. And as I said, guys, we'll send on the slides to you so you have all that information as well as our key takeaways. And we'll go back to the questions. And a great question that's come in from Michael. Michael's saying, how do you see AI decisions or guardrails being determined by organization policy, delegated authority rights, i.e. segregation of duties and GPOs? So basically, who's kind of doing the AI decisioning? What do you think, Oli?
So it depends on what you mean, right? I mean, there's an everyday decision to be taken. Like with every business transaction, you need to decide what is the GL code, right? What is the tax code, right? That stuff needs to be decided. And that needs to be decided based on the work instructions and the knowledge that you provide to the AI, right? So that's the everyday decisions. So the decisions that are relevant for that discussion, I think that's what you mean, is who has the authority to decide on what goes into work instruction and what is to be changed in master data, for example, right? And this authority, and this is a shortcoming of how most GPOs are established, right? I mean, people understand that we need to have a global process ownership because we need to think about stuff end to end and we need to standardize in order to get to consistent results, right? I mean, this is very easy to explain. Everyone understands. This is why everyone or most companies have that role. In most companies, that role is just a role because this person cannot decide how things are actually done because that sits then still with the local business that gets the mandate to the GBS to do the things exactly how they want. And if it doesn't make sense and if it's not right, the standard that on group level is desired, right, there is this conflict happening, right? Local business, group, and then the GBS organization, the triangle of terror here. So from my point of view, and I know that it's very, very hard to do, is that the GPO needs to be someone that has actual authority to decide. Also decide on behalf of a business unit how it should be done, or at least have a very strong voice in the debate with the business unit on how to do it. If that is not the case, not going to work. That means this person needs to have full backing and empowerment by the group C level because it's going to be the core component to make an agentic transformation successful. Or just think it through. If every company code does stuff differently, you end up developing work instructions independently for every company code. Just imagine how expensive this gets and how impossible to maintain. It's just not what you should be doing to scale stuff quickly and realize a great business case for your company, right? And the only path is to have a fully empowered GPO that can make decisions or at least has backing from group level to have a strong voice in the conversation. Let's carefully put it that way, right? GPO, very important. The moment of the GPO, the agentic transformation.
I think also Gregory's brought up a really interesting point in the chat, and he says an important challenge with agentic AI for business processes is incentive alignment. Why would process owners be motivated to thoroughly document and automate workflows that currently define their value, especially if they fear loss of control?
It depends on what targets you set for those guys. Come on, right? I mean, how does the bonus structure look like, right? I mean, just define that correctly. God damn it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you know how it is, right? I mean, there's folks that think that having lots of people working for them is what they want to achieve in life, right? I mean, if you do not incentivize them on that vision for your strategy, that is in 5 years from now, 90% handled by agents autonomously, and then make a plan and put KPIs behind that plan that goes into the bonus of those people. It's not so hard, right? This is how you do it, but you also need to do it like this, right? You need to rethink this, and that needs to be aligned with your bigger strategy on agentifying your GBS. I don't find that so complicated. I mean, it's never done correctly. That's a different story. But I find it relatively easy to remove those misalignments. Just
Yeah.
be smart about it.
We've got time for one more question, but if you guys do have more questions, pop them in the chat. SSON is going to send them on to us, so we'll make sure to reply to you by email with more detail or on LinkedIn if that's better for you. Lonnie asked kind of, or maybe we'll, if you could just pop the last poll up while we just do the final question. Lonnie is asking here, at what point do you predict our first year staff or juniors will be managing AI agents and workflows rather than learning manual grunt work? And will our education system catch up to train the next generation of workforce to utilize this technology? Lonnie, this is usually a question I would skip over, but these guys told me to give them the difficult ones. So let's start with the first part of this. At what point do you predict our first year staff will be managing AI agents and workflows rather than learning manual grunt work? Who wants to take that?
Well, in software development, this is already happening, right?
Yeah.
So there are currently AI LLMs active that can automate a huge part of your software development. And you have, and this is the interesting part, the good engineers are able to steer 4 different agents at the same time to basically
Yeah.
build their app and do 30,000 lines of code in a day instead of in 4 weeks. So this is actually already happening, but currently the point is, I think there you really need to be a good engineer to use it properly. 10x your work only works if you know what you're doing, but it is moving very fast. In our team, I'm seeing as well that everyone is using these licenses to start building their own apps for demos and things. So
Yeah.
it's not gonna take that long, I think. But also for the second part, like I know from at least the Dutch education system that also in universities they are now already adding courses on how to use AI and prove that they used AI in their courses and then show how they try to use it, and they're being scored on it.
Yeah.
So at
Exciting.
least from our end,
Yeah,
I know they're
but
doing it quite
clearly,
actively.
just a great question. I mean, you can imagine that this is a topic that moves me a lot, right? Because I think we're doing way too little, and there's no strategy, there's no vision. It's pretty clear what's going to happen in the next 5 years, right? 90% done by agents, right? And that requires a different way of working, different skill sets, different professions, what have you. This is not done now because it needs to be done now, right? I can just talk about my kids, right? I mean, I'm telling my son if he wants to figure out something in Minecraft, he should be asking ChatGPT and figure that out, right? I mean, you need to learn to converse and talk to AI and how you work with this and right understanding how it uses knowledge, how it works with instructions, right? This is something that is just a core skill that needs to be taught now, right? I mean, there's no future that is any different except in other jobs, but certainly not in white collar.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, sadly, that's all we've got time for. So thank you so much to everyone that attended the webinar today. There is a copy of the slides in the resource centre there for you. As I mentioned in our final poll, at KPMG, they do have some roundtables that Hypatus is doing alongside them in both in Amsterdam, in Sweden, and in Poland. So if you're located in those places and would like to take part in that, you can add me on LinkedIn or press invite in the chat to be part of it, and we will get some more information to you. Otherwise, there's various different ways to find out more about Agentic GBS by downloading that How to Build Your Agentic GBS resource, the slides, or of course, adding us on LinkedIn to continue the conversation. I want to say thanks so much to Uli and to Hans and the SSO Network for hosting this session, and we'll look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone. Thanks for your questions. Great discussion. Thank you so much. And thanks, Hans.